Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. Before I introduce our next episode of the Authority File, I want to remind our listeners that we have a brand new podcast on the way. It's called Patron Driven, and it's a narrative-style podcast that brings you crowdsourced library stories where the personal meets the professional. Season 1 is a 5-part series that follows 4 librarians through the destruction of the Lone Star College Kingwood Library after Hurricane Harvey, and the 2 years it took to rebuild. It's a really incredible story and features writing and producing from the whole podcast team here at Choice, including Mark Dirks, Sabrina Kofer, and myself. I hope you'll tune in. Patron Driven debuts in late June wherever you get your podcasts. You can visit our website, choice360.org, and click on the librarianship drop-down to sign up for email updates about Patron Driven. While you're there, you'll find behind-the-scenes bonus content for the new program, and you can check out the new trailer for the upcoming series. Okay, so in the meantime, in the next episode of this podcast, we're going to be talking about a new book published by Wilfrid Laurier University Press. It's called The Black Prairie Archives, and it's a remarkable volume that collects a variety of works from a wide range of individuals, from 19th century black fur traders to contemporary writers and rappers. The volume sets out to redefine and expand the regional literature of the Canadian Prairie, highlighting the cultural output of late 19th and early 20th century black writers and residents of the Prairie, while finding a through line to today's black writers living in the same areas. The book is ambitious in its goal of transforming the traditional literary perspectives of the Prairie, male, Anglophone, and white, to one that is culturally more accurate. My guest is Karina Vernon, the editor of the Black Prairie Archives and an associate professor of English at the University of Toronto, where she focuses on teaching and research on Black Canadian literature, archives, and decolonization. This series is brought to you by Wilfrid Laurier University Press. In this third episode, we talk about what the book means to Karina on a more personal level, as well as more about how she conducted her archival research and the serendipitous discoveries she encountered along the way. I want to get to a little bit of a more personal perspective, and particularly with the dedication that you wrote in the book, which reads, quote, "To the memory of my mother and father, Elvina, Dick, and Walter Vernon, and to my children, Felix and Ursula." And to me that seemed rooted in the past, but also looking forward to the future. And it seemed very intentional in the way that you wrote the dedication. I'm wondering if there's something behind that, and if you could talk a little bit about that.
I really like this question. Thanks for that one. The book is scholarly, but it's also rooted in a deeply personal search for my own history and culture and identity. My family, my mother and father and I, as I mentioned, my family immigrated to the prairies in 1981 from Honduras. And so we became part of the story of the Black Prairies, but we didn't know it. When I arrived, I lived in a very small town called Olds, north of Calgary, an hour north of Calgary in Alberta. And at that time, I thought that my sister and I and our father were the only Black people to live on the prairies. And that was so deeply incorrect. So I had to research my way into an identity. The archive has become my story, and now my small children are part of that story too. So the dedication points to my method. The Black Prairie Archive looks backwards, back to the 1780s, but it also looks ahead to the future, to the waves of settlement that are happening now, and to that writing that might be yet to come. And so the dedication points to that, simultaneously looking back and looking ahead.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'd like to get back to a little bit of sort of the process of putting this volume together for you, and I imagine archival research can be like sitting on an archaeological dig, and in that you kind of choose a spot where you're most likely to find what you're looking for, but it can also be searching for an image in a poem, or where serendipity and free association allow for startling combinations. I'm wondering if you have had both of those experiences while researching this book. Can you tell us about a time where you suspected something interesting might be lurking in an archive and you found it?
Mm.
Or a time when you found something totally unexpected, what that was, or, what was that sort of search like for you?
Great question. I can tell you of a couple of different instances like that. Um, I suspected there wouldn't be much writing in the pre 1900 period, um, for a number of reasons. I thought, because of the literacy issue, I thought perhaps that the Black people who were coming to that region may not have been able to write, may not have been literate. They might have been too busy with surviving, with setting up homesteads, farming, and that sort of thing. Or if they did write, maybe that writing didn't survive. So I suspected there would be very little writing from that period, but I still hoped. So whenever I did come across something from that period, I was so blown away. And one thing that I found was 3 letters written by Mildred Ware. Her husband remains one of the more famous figures in Black Prairie history. He is famous for being a Black cowboy living in southern Alberta, for inventing the sport of steer wrestling that we now still see at the Calgary Stampede. He apparently discovered oil in the region by noticing some oily water in a pond. So he's kind of the more famous of the two, but John Ware was illiterate, and his wife is the person who kept the records of their homestead and who wrote letters. And she sent a series of letters to a brand's office to try to get their cattle brand registered. And these letters survive, and I found them in the Glenbow Museum in Calgary. And they're very short letters, but they say so much. So when you say searching for an image and free association, I immediately think of her writing. She wrote to the brand's office to try to get her brand 999 registered. And when the brand book was published, it wasn't in the book. So she opened this book and only to find her brand not there. So she had to write again and ask for it to be registered. And to me, that said, I saw myself, honestly, and I saw so many of us who, went to open up the book of history or literature only to find ourselves not there.
Right.
Or
to have to make, I was just going to say, or to have to make that extra effort, to go and the extra length to make sure these kinds of things happen.
To persist. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you asked about if there was a time when I found something totally unexpected. And there were many times for me along the journey where I just wondered. Some of the more famous Black people on the prairies are sports figures, sports personalities. I grew up in Alberta in the 1980s, and when Jerome McGinley, the Black hockey player for the Calgary Flames, was famous, Grant Fuhr, other hockey players like that, and I just thought, I wonder if they wrote anything. Have they written a memoir or anything like that? So that started me thinking about maybe looking in places that I might not normally look. And I did find some sports writing. And I include sports writing in the anthology, and I'm very pleased with this. I found a memoir written by Woody Strode about breaking the color barrier in American and Canadian football. He played for the Calgary Stampeders in 1948, the year where they were undefeated champions, and it's just a fabulous memoir of his time in Calgary. And I found a memoir written by Georges Larocque, who was an enforcer for a time for the Edmonton Oilers. And this is lively, amazing writing. And so that surprised me. And I'm really happy to have representation from that aspect of prairie culture in the book.
You just heard from Karina Vernon, the editor of the Black Prairie Archives and an associate professor of English at the University of Toronto, where she focuses on teaching and research on Black Canadian literature, archives, and decolonization. This series is brought to you by Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Join us next week for our final episode of this series, where Karina talks about how she decided what among the wide range of writings made it into the Black Prairie Archives, and the importance of the scholarship that she contributes to the collection.
There's a scholar and poet in Canada named George Eliot Clarke, and he has said that because Black history is so little known in Canada, that Black writers have to become historians. And the same was true for me. Because Black Prairie history is so little known in Canada, I have to become a historian too. I have to tell that story. I have to reconstruct the context and situate the literature in its historical context in order for that literature to make sense to readers.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media specialist, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.